At my husband's funeral, a woman I'd never seen stormed in screaming that Richard left everything to her and their son. She shoved papers in my face. But when the lawyer read the real will, she collapsed. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Helen Margaret Anderson, and I'm 72 years old. For 48 years, I was Richard's wife, his partner, the woman who stood beside him through every triumph and setback. I wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention or craved expensive things. I never needed designer handbags or luxury vacations to feel valued. My joy came from the simple, beautiful moments that make up a real life. Sunday morning pancakes with extra blueberries just the way Richard liked them, tending my rose garden in the early morning while the dew was still fresh on the petals, reading bedtime stories to my grandchildren with all the funny voices that made them giggle uncontrollably. People in our neighborhood knew me as the woman who always had fresh chocolate chip cookies cooling on the counter and a listening ear for anyone who needed it. When Mrs. Patterson next door lost her husband, I brought her dinner every night for 2 weeks. When the new family moved in across the street, I was the first one at their door with a welcome basket and a genuine smile. That's just who I was, who I am. I dedicated my entire life to building a warm, loving home. I raised our 3 children, Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer, with patience and unconditional love. I was there for every scraped knee, every school play, every heartbreak and celebration. I taught them kindness, integrity, and the value of family. I worked part-time as a librarian for 30 years, surrounded by books and helping children discover the magic of reading. But my real job, my real calling, was being the heart of our family. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who organized the holiday gatherings, who kept photo albums documenting every precious memory. I never asked for credit or recognition. I didn't need my name on awards or public acknowledgement of my contributions. I just wanted us to be happy. I wanted our home to be a sanctuary where everyone felt loved and safe. I thought we were living that dream. I truly believed we were. Richard always called me his rock. He'd tell friends at dinner parties how lucky he was to have me, how I made everything possible for him. He'd hold my hand across the table and say I was the best decision he ever made. I'd blush and squeeze his hand back, feeling grateful that after nearly 5 decades together, we still had that spark, that connection. I wasn't naive or foolish. I knew marriages took work. I knew the passion of youth evolved into something deeper and more comfortable with time. I was content with our quiet evenings reading side by side, our morning coffee rituals, our established rhythms and routines. This was what a good marriage looked like after 48 years, I thought. This was love matured and tested and proven strong. I sacrificed dreams of my own to support Richard's ambitions. When his business required us to move away from my aging parents, I went without complaint. When he needed to work long hours building his accounting firm, I handled everything at home so he could focus. When money was tight in the early years, I stretched every dollar and never made him feel guilty about our struggles. I believed we were a team. I believed in us. Looking at old photographs now, I see a woman who was genuinely happy. My smile in those pictures wasn't forced or fake. I loved my life. I loved my husband. I loved the family we built together. I had no idea that while I was cherishing our beautiful story, Richard was writing a completely different one behind my back. I had no idea that the life I thought we shared was only half real. I had no idea that I was about to lose everything I believed in. Before everything fell apart, before my world shattered into a million irreparable pieces, my life followed a gentle, predictable rhythm that I absolutely cherished. There was comfort in the routine, beauty in the ordinary moments that most people overlook. Every single morning, I'd wake at 6 o'clock just as the first golden light crept through our bedroom curtains. Richard would still be sleeping, breathing deeply, his graying hair slightly mussed against the pillow. I'd slip out of bed quietly, not wanting to disturb him, and pad downstairs to our kitchen, the heart of our home. I'd make Richard his coffee exactly how he liked it, the way I'd been making it for 48 years. 2 sugars, a generous splash of cream, stirred precisely 12 times. It sounds silly counting the stirs, but it was our little ritual. I'd bring it to him right as his alarm went off at 6:30, and he'd smile that sleepy smile and say, "What would I do without you, Helen?" Every single morning, the same words, and every morning they made me feel needed, valued, loved. We'd sit together at our kitchen table reading the newspaper, him handling the business section while I enjoyed the local news, community events, and my beloved crossword puzzles. Sometimes we'd read interesting bits aloud to each other. "Listen to this," Richard would say, and share some financial news he found fascinating. I'd tell him about upcoming library events or neighborhood happenings. These quiet morning moments, just the two of us connected over coffee and newsprint, felt sacred to me. Our home was a living museum of 48 years together. Wedding photos on the mantel showed us impossibly young and full of dreams. Children's artwork that Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer had created decades ago hung framed in the hallway. I'd saved every special piece. The living room was where our grandchildren played every Sunday afternoon, their laughter filling the space with joy. Toys were tucked in a wicker basket in the corner. A blanket fort from last week's visit still draped over 2 chairs, because I hadn't had the heart to take it down yet. Richard and I had our established routines that gave structure and meaning to our weeks. Friday nights were sacred, our date night at Giuseppe's Italian restaurant. We'd been going there for 23 years, always requested the corner booth, always ordered the same meals. Alfredo for me, lasagna for him, and we'd share a tiramisu for dessert. Giovanni, the owner, would greet us like family, because that's what we'd become over the decades. Saturday mornings meant the farmer's market. Richard would carry the canvas bags while I selected fresh vegetables, talked to the vendors, and picked up flowers for our kitchen table. We'd hold hands while we walked, discussing what we'd cook for Sunday dinner when the kids came over. Should we make pot roast or try that new salmon recipe Jennifer sent me? Evening walks around the neighborhood were another treasured tradition. After dinner, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, we'd stroll hand in hand down familiar streets. We'd wave to neighbors watering their lawns, stop to pet dogs, and talk about everything and nothing. We'd discuss our children's lives. Sarah's promotion, Michael's new house, Jennifer's daughter starting kindergarten. We'd plan vacations we wanted to take, dream about retirement adventures like visiting all the national parks or taking a cruise through Alaska. I'd spend my afternoons in my garden, my personal sanctuary, nurturing the roses Richard gave me on our 20th anniversary. Those original bushes had propagated over the years, and now my entire backyard bloomed with their descendants. Deep reds, soft pinks, sunny yellows. I'd lose myself in the therapeutic work of pruning, watering, feeding the soil, watching beautiful things grow under my care. Our friends constantly told us how lucky we were, how rare it was to see a couple still so connected after nearly 50 years. "You two are relationship goals," Martha said at last month's dinner party, and everyone agreed enthusiastically. I felt blessed beyond measure, truly blessed to have built such a beautiful life with my best friend, my soulmate, my Richard. About 6 months before Richard's sudden heart attack changed everything, something small caught my attention. It was such a minor thing, so easy to dismiss. But looking back now, it was the first crack in the foundation of my perfect life. Richard had always been completely open with his phone. For years, he'd leave it on the kitchen counter, face up, never hiding anything. If it rang while he was in the shower, he'd call out, "Helen, can you check who that is?" We had that kind of trust, that kind of transparency. We had nothing to hide from each other, or so I believed. But one Tuesday evening in late March, everything felt slightly different. I walked into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea, and I noticed Richard quickly flip his phone face down on the couch cushion. The movement was fast, almost reflexive, like he didn't want me to see the screen. My steps faltered for just a second. "Everything okay?" I asked, handing him his tea. "Of course," he said, smiling that familiar smile. "Just work stuff, boring numbers." He kissed my cheek and we settled in to watch our usual Tuesday night television program. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the ease between us felt slightly strained. Then there were the late business meetings that started happening more frequently. Richard owned a successful accounting firm downtown, and late meetings weren't entirely unusual, especially during tax season. But this wasn't tax season. It was spring, a relatively slow time. Yet suddenly, Tuesday evenings became standing appointments, Thursday afternoons too. "Big client," Richard would explain, grabbing his briefcase and tie. "You know how demanding they can be. Don't wait up." Something about his tone when he mentioned these meetings felt different. Rehearsed, almost mechanical, like he'd practiced the words before saying them. I started noticing other small things. Richard had always been affectionate, but now his kisses felt perfunctory, placed on my forehead or cheek quickly before rushing out the door. He'd come home from these late meetings looking energized rather than tired, almost glowing. When I'd ask about his day, his answers became vague. "Fine, the usual. Nothing special." For a man who used to share detailed stories about difficult clients and workplace drama, this new brevity felt strange. One Saturday morning, while Richard was in the shower singing off-key like he always did, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it without really meaning to snoop. It was just automatic, the way you look at a ringing phone. Old habits from a trusting marriage, where we knew each other's passwords and freely checked each other's messages. The screen showed a text from someone named David that read, "Can't wait to see you Tuesday. Miss you already." My heart did a strange little skip. The message had a red heart emoji at the end. I stood there frozen, staring at those words. David. I didn't know any David in Richard's business circle. And that heart emoji, that felt odd for a business contact. Very odd. What kind of professional colleague sends heart emojis and says, "Miss you already"? The shower turned off. I heard Richard humming, completely carefree. I set the phone back down exactly where it had been, my hands trembling slightly. My mind immediately started creating explanations. Maybe David was an old friend, someone sentimental who used emojis casually. Maybe it was a woman named David. That was a name that could go either way, wasn't it? Maybe I'd misread the tone entirely. Richard emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, saw me standing there, and smiled. "What's that look for?" he asked. "Nothing," I said automatically, "just thinking about what to make for breakfast." He kissed my forehead and got dressed while I stood there, frozen, wondering if I was losing my mind. Surely I was imagining things. This was Richard, my husband of 48 years. We didn't have secrets. We didn't lie to each other. I pushed the thought away, buried it deep, and went downstairs to make pancakes like nothing had happened. I became an expert at making excuses for everything, every single inconsistency, every strange behavior, every gut feeling that whispered something was wrong. I had a perfectly logical explanation ready. The face-down phone? Obviously, Richard was just being more careful about client privacy. He'd mentioned new confidentiality regulations at the firm just last month, hadn't he? Maybe there was sensitive financial information on his screen, account numbers or tax details that needed protecting. That made perfect sense. He was being professional, responsible, cautious. Nothing suspicious about that at all. The late meetings? Well, tax season might be over, but wealthy clients always had complex financial situations that required attention year-round. Richard had built his firm's reputation on being available, going above and beyond. Of course, he'd have demanding clients who needed evening appointments. They probably had day jobs themselves and could only meet after hours. I was being unreasonable to question his dedication to his work. He'd always been a hard worker. That's how he'd built such a successful business. That's how he'd provided such a comfortable life for our family. That heart emoji from David? I convinced myself that some people were just overly friendly with their emojis. The younger generation used them constantly, didn't they? Maybe David was a younger associate at another firm, someone who communicated casually, informally. The business world was changing, becoming less formal. What seemed intimate to me might be completely normal professional communication now. I was 72 years old, probably just out of touch with modern technology etiquette. I caught myself creating increasingly elaborate explanations for every tiny detail that bothered me. When Richard came home one Wednesday evening smelling faintly of an unfamiliar perfume, something floral and expensive that definitely wasn't my lavender scent, I told myself he'd probably hugged a client. Or maybe he'd walked through the perfume section at Macy's on his lunch break. Or perhaps he'd been in an elevator with someone wearing strong perfume and it had clung to his jacket. People wore such heavy fragrances these days, it was completely innocent. When I noticed withdrawals from our savings account that I didn't recognize, 3 separate withdrawals of $2,000 each over 2 months, I assumed Richard was planning a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. Maybe he was booking a special trip or buying something extravagant he wanted to keep secret until the perfect moment. Richard had always been thoughtful about anniversaries. This must be something wonderful he was planning. I shouldn't spoil the surprise by asking questions. The new cologne he started wearing, the fresher haircuts every 2 weeks instead of monthly, the way he'd started going to the gym 3 times a week when he'd barely exercised in years. All of it had innocent explanations in my mind. He was taking better care of himself. That was good, wasn't it? I should be happy he was prioritizing his health. Maybe he'd had a health scare he hadn't mentioned, something that motivated him to improve his fitness. Men had midlife crises, everyone knew that. This was probably just Richard working through his own mortality fears. It was normal, healthy even. I was so skilled at denial that I convinced myself I was being paranoid and deeply unfair. Richard had given me 48 years of marriage, 48 years of partnership and devotion. He deserved my trust, not my suspicion. What kind of wife doubts her husband over such trivial things? What kind of person questions someone they love based on text messages and cologne and gym memberships? I felt guilty for even having these thoughts, ashamed of myself for being so insecure. I threw myself deeper into my routines, desperately trying to drown out that persistent whisper of doubt. I baked more: cookies, cakes, pies, bread, filling our house with warm, comforting smells. I spent extra hours in the garden, pruning and planting until my hands were covered in dirt and my back ached. I volunteered for additional shifts at the library, surrounding myself with books and cheerful patrons. I stayed so busy, so constantly occupied, that I didn't have time to think, didn't have space to acknowledge that growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. If I stayed busy enough, active enough, distracted enough, I could silence that small, nagging voice in my head that whispered something was terribly wrong. 3 months before Richard died, I found the first piece of real, undeniable evidence. It was a completely ordinary Thursday afternoon, and I was doing laundry, something I'd done thousands upon thousands of times over nearly 5 decades of marriage. There was something meditative about the routine, something comforting in the simple domestic rhythm of sorting colors from whites, checking pockets, treating stains, folding warm clothes fresh from the dryer. It was mindless work that allowed my thoughts to wander peacefully. I was in our bedroom, gathering Richard's work clothes from the hamper, when I picked up the gray slacks he'd worn the day before. Out of habit, I checked the pockets before tossing them in the washing machine. Usually, I'd find the predictable things: receipts from the coffee shop, loose change that jingled, maybe a business card from a new client or networking contact. These little discoveries were like tiny windows into Richard's day, innocent and unremarkable. But this time, my fingers found something different. A piece of paper, folded tightly and tucked deep into the front pocket, pushed down as far as it would go, as if someone had tried very deliberately to hide it. My heart started racing before I even unfolded it. some primal instinct recognizing that this was significant, that this was the moment everything would change. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and carefully unfolded the creased paper. It was a receipt from Morrison's Fine Jewelry, a upscale store downtown that Richard and I had walked past hundreds of times but rarely entered. The receipt was dated 2 weeks earlier, a Tuesday evening at 7:45 p.m. My eyes scanned down to the item description. Ladies' diamond tennis bracelet, 14K white gold, 2 carats total weight. The price made my breath catch. $1,500. $1,500 for a bracelet I'd never seen, never received, didn't even know existed. I sat down heavily on the edge of our bed, that receipt shaking in my trembling hands, feeling the entire room spin around me. Our anniversary wasn't for another 4 months. My birthday had passed 3 months ago with a lovely dinner and a book I'd wanted. No jewelry. Richard had never been the type to buy expensive jewelry spontaneously. In 48 years of marriage, he'd given me jewelry exactly 5 times. My engagement ring, our wedding bands, a pearl necklace for our 10th anniversary, diamond earrings for our 25th, and a simple gold bracelet for our 40th. Each piece had been presented during a special occasion, with ceremony and meaning. This purchase was different. It was made on a Tuesday evening at 7:45, during one of his late business meetings. The timeline crashed over me like a wave. I remembered that specific Tuesday. Richard had called at 6 o'clock saying he'd be late. Important client, don't wait dinner. I'd eaten alone, watched Jeopardy by myself, gone to bed at 10. He'd come home around 11, kissed my forehead, said the meeting had gone well, and climbed into bed beside me smelling faintly of that unfamiliar perfume I'd explained away. He hadn't been at a meeting. He'd been buying a $1,500 diamond bracelet for someone who wasn't his wife. Every innocent explanation I'd created came crashing down around me like a house of cards in a windstorm. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt tight, constricted, like someone was squeezing my heart in their fist. But I couldn't stop. I had to know more. I had to confirm what my gut was screaming at me. I started searching through more pockets with shaking hands, more drawers, places I'd never thought to look before because we didn't keep secrets. In his car's glove compartment, buried under the registration papers and insurance documents, I found a Valentine's Day card still in its envelope, sealed, never given. The envelope was addressed in Richard's handwriting, to my darling V. Not H for Helen, V for someone else. Someone who got diamond bracelets and Valentine's cards and my husband's time while I sat home alone eating dinner and doing crossword puzzles. Completely oblivious. I sat in Richard's car in our garage, holding that card, and felt my entire world crumbling into dust around me. Richard died suddenly on a cold Tuesday evening in October, 3 months after I'd found that jewelry receipt. He died from a massive heart attack that struck without warning, without giving me a chance to confront him, to demand answers, to understand why he'd betrayed everything we'd built together. The hospital called me at 9:47 p.m., and even now I remember the exact time because I was watching the news and the clock on the screen burned into my memory the moment my phone rang. "Mrs. Anderson, this is Memorial Hospital. Your husband Richard has been brought in by ambulance. I'm very sorry, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. We need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible." The nurse's voice was professional but gentle, practiced at delivering devastating news to unsuspecting spouses. My whole body went numb. Dead? Richard was dead? That was impossible. He'd left for work this morning, healthy and normal, kissed my forehead, told me he'd be home by 8. Where? I managed to whisper. Where was he when it happened? There was a pause, a hesitation that should have warned me. He collapsed at an apartment complex on Riverside Drive. The paramedics responded immediately, but there was nothing they could do. I'm so sorry for your loss. An apartment complex. Not his office downtown, not anywhere he should have been, not anywhere he'd told me he would be. The numbness spread through my entire body like ice water in my veins. Sarah drove me to the hospital. I couldn't have operated a car if my life depended on it. I moved through the emergency room entrance like a ghost, not fully present, not fully believing any of this was real. The hospital staff looked at me with such profound pity, and I didn't understand why until a nurse gently touched my arm and said, "Mrs. Anderson, there was a woman with him when he collapsed. She rode in the ambulance. She's been asking about him. She's in the waiting room." A woman. A woman was with my husband when he died. Not me. Not his wife of 48 years. A stranger. My legs almost gave out, but Sarah caught me. Together we walked into that sterile waiting room with its uncomfortable plastic chairs and flickering fluorescent lights. And there she was, a woman in her 40s, beautiful in that effortless way some women are, with long dark hair and elegant clothes. She was devastated, crying like her entire world had ended, mascara running down her face, hands shaking as she clutched a tissue. She looked up when I entered, and the recognition in her eyes was immediate and terrible. She knew exactly who I was. "You're Helen," she whispered, her voice breaking on my name. "I'm Vivian. Richard told me about you." Told her about me? The words didn't make sense. I stood there frozen, unable to process what was happening, unable to reconcile this crying woman with my dead husband with the life I thought I'd been living. "We've been together for 3 years," Vivian continued, the words tumbling out through her tears. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to find out this way. I loved him so much. We were planning a future together." 3 years. 3 years. The number echoed in my skull like a scream. While I was making his coffee every morning, planning our retirement, believing in our beautiful life, celebrating our 45th, 46th, and 47th anniversaries, he was with her, building another life, making other promises, being someone else's love. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't understand how the man I'd loved for 48 years, the man I'd given my entire life to, the man who called me his rock and held my hand and promised forever, had been living a complete lie. Sarah was saying something, her voice angry and protective, but I couldn't hear through the ringing in my ears. "How long have you known he was married?" Sarah demanded, stepping between us. Vivian looked genuinely confused. "He told me you were separated, that the marriage had been over for years, that you lived separate lives but stayed together for financial reasons." Separated? We'd shared a bed every single night. We'd made love just last week. We'd planned a cruise for next spring. What part of that was separated? The funeral was 5 days later, and I moved through it in a thick fog of shock and grief that made everything feel distant and unreal. Our children were beside me the entire time. Sarah holding my left hand, Michael standing protectively at my right shoulder, Jennifer keeping a steady arm around my waist. All 3 of them were devastated by losing their father, but they were also furious on my behalf. They'd learned about Vivian within hours of Richard's death, and their anger was a palpable, burning thing. Friends and family filled the church to capacity. The pews were packed with people who'd known Richard as a pillar of the community, a successful businessman, a devoted family man. They offered condolences, shared memories of Richard as a good man, someone generous and kind. Each kind word felt like a knife twisting in my chest because I no longer knew which version of Richard had been real. Had any of it been true? Or had our entire life been a performance? I nodded and thanked people mechanically, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. The minister spoke about Richard's dedication to family, his 48-year marriage, his love for his children and grandchildren. I wanted to stand up and scream that it was all lies, but I sat frozen in the front pew, silent and hollow. Then, during the reception at our home afterward, Richard's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, pulled me aside into Richard's home office. His expression was grave, uncomfortable, the look of someone about to deliver more bad news to a person who'd already endured too much. "Helen, there's something you need to know before the will reading tomorrow. Richard made some significant changes to his estate planning about 6 months ago. My stomach dropped like a stone. 6 months ago. Right around the time I'd started noticing the strange behavior, the hidden phone calls, the unexplained absences. "What kind of changes?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. He established several trust funds, substantial ones. He also changed beneficiary designations on some accounts and policies. "I'm legally required to inform you that there are additional beneficiaries listed beyond yourself and your children." Additional beneficiaries. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I felt Sarah's hand grip my shoulder from behind. She'd followed us into the office, sensing trouble. "Are you telling me my father was planning to cut us out?" she asked sharply. "Not entirely," Mr. Patterson said carefully. "But the estate distribution is more complicated than the original will indicate. I think it's best we discuss everything at tomorrow's formal reading." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vivian's face, heard her saying, 3 years, felt the world tilting sideways. At 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to Richard's home office. It was a room I'd rarely entered during our marriage. Richard had always said it was boring business stuff I wouldn't want to bother with, just tedious financial documents and tax records. I'd respected his space, trusted his judgment, never questioned why the office door was often locked. But now I searched through everything with methodical determination. I went through his filing cabinets, his desk drawers, every box and folder. In a locked drawer, I found the key taped under his desk. I discovered documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing regular monthly transfers of $3,000 to an account I didn't recognize. Going back 3 years. Property papers for a condominium on Riverside Drive. The same address where he'd collapsed. Life insurance policies I didn't know existed, with Vivian Shaw listed as beneficiary. Multiple policies, totaling over $500,000. And photographs. Dozens of photographs tucked in a manila envelope, hidden at the very back of the drawer. Pictures of Richard with Vivian, smiling and embracing at restaurants, on beaches, in bed together. Pictures of Richard with a teenage boy who had his eyes, his nose, his exact same smile. The boy was in a basketball uniform in some photos, graduation, robes in others, casual clothes at what looked like family dinners, family photos, a family I knew nothing about. My hands shook as I laid out all the documents on Richard's desk like evidence at a crime scene. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a betrayal. My husband hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd had an entire second family for years, maybe longer. He'd systematically moved our money, changed policies, prepared to leave me and our children with nothing, while he built a whole other life. I collapsed right there on the floor of Richard's office at 3 a.m, surrounded by the evidence of his complete and total betrayal, and the dam I'd been holding back for 5 days finally shattered. I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, until my chest ached and my throat burned raw, clutching those photographs in my trembling hands, looking at the genuine happiness radiating from Richard's face in every single picture. That smile. That same smile he'd given me across the breakfast table just days ago. The same tender expression he'd worn when he looked at our grandchildren. He'd been giving that same look to her, to them, as if love was infinite and betrayal cost nothing. How could he smile at her the exact same way he smiled at me? How could he hold that boy, Marcus, I'd learned his name was Marcus, with the same pride he'd shown holding our own children? How could he build birthday memories and inside jokes and daily routines with them while coming home to me every night and pretending everything was normal? What kind of person does that? What kind of man lives 2 completely separate lives without his hands shaking, without his conscience screaming, without any visible sign of the monster he actually was? 48 years. 48 years of my life given completely and utterly to a man who was simultaneously giving himself to someone else. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd postponed or abandoned entirely. I'd turned down a full-time position as head librarian because Richard said we needed someone home when the children got out of school. I'd moved across the country away from my elderly parents when his business required relocation, visiting them only twice a year until they passed away. I'd spent countless nights alone while he worked late, never complaining, always supportive, always understanding. Those nights weren't work. They were with her. They were with his other family. While I was heating up leftovers and reading alone in bed, he was having dinner with them, tucking Marcus into bed, playing the devoted father and partner in a different home. The memories that once brought me pure joy now felt poisoned, corrupted, impossible to trust. Our last anniversary, just 8 months ago, Richard had taken me to Giovanni's, our special restaurant. He'd held my hand across the table, looked into my eyes with what seemed like genuine emotion, and told me I was the love of his life, that he couldn't imagine existing without me. He'd given me a beautiful card with a handwritten message about our journey together, about growing old side by side. I'd cried happy tears that night, feeling so blessed, so grateful for our enduring love. Was he lying then? Or did he somehow believe it even while maintaining a completely separate relationship? Did he love us both? Could someone actually divide their heart that way? Or was it all just performance, manipulation, a skilled liar playing roles depending on which house he was in? Every kiss suddenly felt suspect. Every "I love you" now rang hollow. Every promise we'd made, in sickness and health, forsaking all others till death do us part, had been shattered by him years ago while I remained faithful, devoted, completely in the dark. I'd honored my vows. I'd loved him with my whole heart, and he'd made a fool of me. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, illuminated only by the desk lamp, and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had I become so invisible? When had I stopped mattering enough for basic honesty and respect? I'd become a convenience in my own marriage, someone to maintain the respectable public image while he lived his real life elsewhere. The Helen in that reflection looked old, exhausted, utterly broken. I thought about Vivian, young and beautiful, and felt a wave of inadequacy crash over me. Of course, Richard chose her. Look at me. 72 years old, gray hair, wrinkles, the body of someone who'd lived 7 decades. I couldn't compete with someone in their 40s. I'd grown old while Richard apparently wanted to stay young. But then, anger sparked through the grief. I'd grown old with him. That was supposed to be our agreement. We were supposed to age together, accept the changes together, love each other through every stage of life. He didn't get to punish me for getting older when he was 75 himself. I stayed on that office floor for hours, cycling through grief and rage and despair in waves that crashed over me relentlessly. The sun began to rise, pale morning light creeping through the window, and I was still there surrounded by evidence, my face swollen from crying, my body aching from sitting on the hard floor. But as dawn broke fully through the window, painting the office in shades of gold and pink, something fundamental shifted deep inside me. Something hardened. Something woke up. I looked at those bank statements again, this time with clearing eyes and a sharpening mind. Richard had been methodically, systematically moving our money I'd helped build through decades of frugal living, smart financial decisions, and partnership, into accounts for Vivian and her son. Our retirement savings that we'd carefully accumulated over 48 years. The college funds we'd been setting aside for our grandchildren's education. The inheritance our children were supposed to receive after building their father's business alongside him during summer jobs and family sacrifice. He'd been stealing from us, from his own legitimate family, to build a comfortable separate life. And Vivian knew. She had to have known he was married. You don't have a 3-year relationship. Don't build a life with someone. Don't accept expensive gifts and property and financial support without knowing where it comes from. She'd claimed Richard told her we were separated, that our marriage was essentially over. But had she ever asked to see divorce papers? Had she ever questioned why a supposedly separated man still lived with his wife, still shared a bed with her, still attended family functions and celebrated anniversaries? Or had she simply chosen to believe convenient lies because they allowed her to take what she wanted without guilt? That meant she'd participated in this betrayal willingly. She'd accepted money and property that belonged to my family. She'd helped Richard deceive me, even if indirectly. And now she expected to walk away with everything, while I was left with nothing but grief and humiliation. The grief was still there, crushing and heavy, a weight that might never fully lift. I would mourn the man I thought Richard was, the marriage I believed we had. But alongside that grief now burned something else entirely: fierce, focused determination. For 48 years, I'd been kind, accommodating, selfless. I'd put everyone else first: Richard's career, my children's needs, my grandchildren's happiness. I'd been the woman who never made waves, never complained, never demanded anything for herself. I'd been gentle, understanding, endlessly patient. Where had that gotten me? Betrayed, humiliated, erased, nearly financially destroyed by the man who'd promised to love and protect me forever. I was done being invisible. I was done letting people take advantage of my gentle nature. I was done being the accommodating wife who accepts whatever scraps of truth and dignity people choose to leave her. Richard might have tried to erase me from his new life, might have planned to leave me destitute and forgotten, but I was still here. I was still standing. My children were still here, also betrayed, also hurt, also deserving of what was rightfully theirs. We deserved better than to be discarded like we'd never mattered. We deserved the security Richard had promised when he took his wedding vows. We deserved the inheritance he'd built using our support, our sacrifice, our contributions. If Richard were still alive, I don't know what I would have done. Confronted him? Divorced him? Forgiven him? Those questions would haunt me forever, unanswered. But Richard was dead, and in his death he'd left a mess of lies and legal manipulations that threatened to destroy what remained of our family. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I stood up from that floor, my knees protesting, my back stiff, but my resolve absolute. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand and looked at the evidence spread across Richard's desk. This was ammunition. This was power. This was the truth that would protect my children and grandchildren from his selfish, destructive choices. I walked to the phone and started making calls. If Richard thought he could betray me for years and get away with it even from the grave, he'd underestimated the woman he married. He'd forgotten that gentle doesn't mean weak. That kind doesn't mean foolish. That quiet doesn't mean defeated. He was about to learn that even the gentlest person has limits, and he'd crossed every single one of mine. My first call was to Mr. Patterson, Richard's lawyer, at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. I knew I was calling early, possibly waking him, but I didn't care. The time for being considerate and accommodating was over. The phone rang 3 times before his groggy voice answered. "Helen, is everything all right?" "No, Mr. Patterson. Everything is not all right," I said, my voice steady and cold in a way I'd never heard it before. "I need to know everything about the changes Richard made to his estate. Every single detail, every account, every policy, every trust, every beneficiary, everything." Mr. Patterson hesitated, and I could hear him becoming more alert, more cautious. "Helen, I understand you're upset, but there are issues of client confidentiality, and the formal reading is scheduled for this afternoon." "Don't you dare talk to me about confidentiality," I interrupted, surprising myself with my own firmness. "I'm his widow, and I have legal rights. If you can't tell me what I need to know, I'll find a lawyer who will make you tell me. I'll file motions, I'll contest everything, and I'll make this as complicated and public as possible. Is that what you want?" There was a long pause. Mr. Patterson had known me for 20 years as the quiet, pleasant wife who smiled at office parties and never caused problems. He was hearing a completely different woman now, and the shock in his silence was palpable. "I'll meet you at my office at 9 o'clock, he finally said. "Bring any documents you found." I gathered every piece of evidence from Richard's office: the bank statements, property deeds, insurance policies, photographs, and organized them methodically into folders. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into Mr. Patterson's office with my head held high, wearing my best black dress and the pearl necklace Richard had given me for our 10th anniversary. I might be devastated, but I would not look defeated. Mr. Patterson laid everything out on his conference table, and the full scope of Richard's deception became even clearer. He'd created multiple trusts for Marcus, established college funds, purchased property, and changed beneficiary designations on several life insurance policies. The total amount redirected away from our family exceeded $2 million. $2 million that should have secured my retirement and my children's inheritance. But then Mr. Patterson said something that changed everything. "However, Helen, Richard never actually changed his original will, the one you both created together 30 years ago. He created these trusts and changed some beneficiary designations, but the core will remains unchanged." My heart started beating faster. What does that mean? It means the will still names you as primary beneficiary and executor of the estate. These trusts and policy changes exist, yes, but there's a critical legal issue. He pulled out the original will, pointing to specific clauses. "This clause here requires that any major estate changes must be properly documented with legal justification. The trusts Richard created reference a second family, but there's no legal documentation, no legitimized paternity claim, no court recognition of Marcus as his son, no legal second marriage, obviously. Without that documentation, these trusts can be challenged as improper dissipation of marital assets." I leaned forward, my mind racing. Richard was sloppy. "Arrogant is more accurate," Mr. Patterson said carefully. "He probably assumed he had more time to formalize everything properly. Or perhaps he never intended to fully separate from you legally, but wanted to provide for both families. Either way, he left significant legal vulnerabilities." I called Sarah immediately after leaving Mr. Patterson's office. When I told her everything, she was silent for a long moment, then said with cold fury, "Mom, we're going to fight this. We're going to protect you and protect our family. Dad made his choices, and now we make ours." Together, Sarah and I contacted Ms. Chen, a lawyer specializing in estate litigation, who came highly recommended. Ms. Chen was a sharp woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. I gave her every document I'd found, explained the entire situation, held nothing back. She listened carefully, taking notes, occasionally asking pointed questions. When I finished, Ms. Chen sat back and smiled grimly. "Mrs. Anderson, your husband made critical mistakes. These financial transfers can be challenged as marital asset dissipation, conducted without your knowledge or consent. In this state, that's illegal when it involves joint marital property. And without proper legal documentation establishing Marcus as his son or creating a valid revised will, the original will takes precedence." "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means we have grounds to void most of these trusts and recover the assets. It means we can challenge every questionable transfer. It means we fight, and we have an excellent chance of winning." She looked at me seriously. "But I need to warn you. This will become public. Court proceedings are public record. Everyone will know about your husband's affair, his second family, everything." I thought about that for a moment. The humiliation of having my private pain exposed publicly, the gossip, the pity, the judgment. Then I thought about Vivian waving papers in my face, claiming everything that my family had built. I thought about my children and grandchildren losing their inheritance because Richard had been selfish and reckless. Let it be public, I said firmly. The truth needs to come out, and justice matters more than my pride. The formal will reading was scheduled for the next day. Miss Chen and I made a strategic decision. We would let it play out publicly, let Vivian show her hand, then expose everything with witnesses present. Sometimes justice needs an audience. Sometimes the truth needs to be undeniable. I went home and prepared for battle. The day of the will reading arrived, and I woke at dawn with a strange sense of calm I hadn't felt since before Richard died. I'd spent the entire night preparing, rehearsing what might happen, steeling myself for confrontation. I chose my clothes carefully. A tailored black dress that was dignified but strong, the pearl necklace Richard had given me decades ago, and my wedding rings. I looked at those rings for a long moment before putting them on. They felt heavy now, weighted with betrayal, but they were also proof of my legitimacy, my 48 years of legal marriage. I was Richard's wife, not her, me. I put on minimal makeup to cover the dark circles under my eyes and the pallor of sleepless nights. I needed to look composed, strong, unbreakable. Not like a victim, not like someone who could be pushed aside and forgotten. I studied my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. There was steel in her eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. Sarah arrived at my house at 9 o'clock to drive me to Mr. Patterson's office. Michael and Jennifer were already waiting in their cars outside. We'd coordinated this together as a family, united, prepared. My children flanked me as we walked into the building, a protective formation that made me feel both supported and heartbroken. They shouldn't have to protect their mother from their father's choices, but here we were. The will reading was being held in Mr. Patterson's large conference room. It was unusual to have such a public reading, but Richard had been a prominent figure in the community. His business partners had requested to attend. Several family friends wanted to be present, and Mr. Patterson hadn't seen any reason to refuse. Now I understood why. Word had spread about Richard's death, about the mysterious woman at the hospital, about complications with the estate. People were curious. They wanted answers. The conference room was already half full when we arrived. Richard's business partners sat along one wall, their expressions solemn and uncomfortable. My sister Margaret was there, having driven 4 hours to support me. Several of our close friends occupied chairs near the back, their faces sympathetic. Ms. Chen, my attorney, sat near the front with her briefcase open, documents organized and ready. She gave me a small, encouraging nod. Our 3 children sat beside me in the front row, a united front. Sarah kept squeezing my hand reassuringly. Michael's jaw was clenched tight, his anger barely contained. Jennifer had tears in her eyes already, grieving both her father's death and the destruction of everything she'd believed about him. Then the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Vivian arrived and every head turned. She walked in wearing an expensive black designer dress, carrying a large Prada handbag with oversized sunglasses covering half her face. Behind her walked Marcus, the teenage boy from the photographs, around 16 or 17, tall and lanky, looking uncomfortable and confused. He had Richard's eyes. Seeing those familiar eyes in this stranger's face made my stomach turn. Vivian removed her sunglasses with a flourish and surveyed the room like she owned it. Her gaze landed on me, and I saw something flicker across her face. Was it guilt? Defiance? Triumph? I couldn't quite read it. She took a seat directly across from us, positioning herself as an equal party, as if she had every right to be here claiming her piece of my husband's estate. The room buzzed with whispers. People who didn't know about Richard's double life were learning quickly, piecing together why this strange woman and teenage boy were present at the reading. I heard fragments of shocked conversations. Is that her? The other woman? That's Richard's son? Did Helen know? Mr. Patterson entered, looking deeply uncomfortable with the size and tension of the gathering. He carried a leather folder containing Richard's will and various documents. Thank you all for coming, he began formally. We're here today to read the last will and testament of Richard James Anderson. I want to remind everyone that this is a solemn occasion, and I ask for respectful behavior. Vivian shifted in her seat, her hand moving to her expensive handbag. She pulled out a stack of papers and placed them deliberately on the table in front of her, making sure everyone could see. Her expression was confident, almost smug. She believed she was about to win. She believed Richard had secured her future. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my face composed. Inside, my heart was hammering, but I refused to show fear or weakness. Miss Chen caught my eye and gave me the slightest nod. Everything was in place. The truth was about to come out, and there were plenty of witnesses to see it unfold. Mr. Patterson was about to begin reading the will when Vivian suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every eye in the room turned to her. "Before we start," she announced, her voice carrying across the silent room with theatrical confidence, "I think everyone should know that Richard made provisions for Marcus and me. Substantial provisions. This isn't going to be what you all expect." The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Sarah's hand tightened around mine so hard it almost hurt. I felt Michael tense beside me, ready to stand, but I touched his arm gently. Let her talk. Let her reveal herself completely before we struck back. Vivian held up the papers she'd brought, waving them dramatically. Richard established trusts for our son. He transferred properties into my name. He changed beneficiary designations. It's all legal and notarized and documented. Her voice grew louder, more emotional, playing to the audience. He left everything to me and our son. Marcus deserves his father's legacy just as much as anyone else in this room. She turned and looked directly at me, her eyes blazing with defiance and something else. Desperation, maybe? Fear disguised as aggression? I know this is hard for you, Helen, but Richard loved us. He wanted to take care of us. These documents prove it. He made his choices clear. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see if I would break down, cry, cause a scene. But I sat perfectly still, my face calm, my hands steady in my lap. I'd cried all my tears alone in the darkness. I had none left for this public spectacle. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Vivian faltered slightly at my composure. She'd expected hysteria, tears, capitulation. My calmness unsettled her. "I just want everyone to understand." "Oh, I think we all understand perfectly," Ms. Chen interrupted, standing smoothly. Her voice was professional, sharp, devastating. "Mrs. Shaw, I'm Eleanor Chen, Mrs. Anderson's attorney. Before Mr. Patterson reads the actual legal will, perhaps we should examine those documents you're waving around so confidently." Vivian clutched the papers to her chest defensively. "These are private." "Nothing is private in probate court, which is where this will end up if you continue to make claims against the estate," Ms. Chen said coolly. "Mr. Patterson, please proceed with reading Richard Anderson's last will and testament, the legally executed document that has never been superseded or replaced." Mr. Patterson looked relieved to have direction. He opened the leather folder and began reading in his formal lawyer's voice. "I, Richard James Anderson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, executed on June 15th, 1995. With each sentence, I watched Vivian's face lose more color. The will was clear and unambiguous. Everything, the house, the business, the retirement accounts, the investments, was left to me, Helen Margaret Anderson, his wife. Provisions were made for our 3 children, Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer. College funds were established for our grandchildren. There was no mention of Vivian, no mention of Marcus, no mention of trusts or separate arrangements. When Mr. Patterson finished reading, the silence was absolute. Vivian stood frozen, her confident expression crumbling into confusion and then panic. "That's not right," she whispered. "That can't be the real will. Richard told me. He promised." Miss Chen stood and walked to the front of the room, connecting her laptop to the projector. Since Mrs. Shaw has made public claims about Mr. Anderson's intentions, I believe it's appropriate to examine the evidence publicly. She looked at me for permission. I nodded once, firmly. The screen lit up with the timeline we'd created, a detailed chronological display of Richard's deception. Bank statements showing systematic transfers of money from joint marital accounts to accounts in Vivian's name. $3,000 every month for 3 years. Property records showing the Riverside Drive condominium purchased with marital funds. Life insurance policies where beneficiaries had been changed without my knowledge or consent, which was illegal under state law for joint policies. The gasps from the audience were audible. Richard's business partners looked shocked and disgusted. Friends who'd admired our marriage looked betrayed on my behalf. I watched their faces as they realized the scope of Richard's lies, the systematic way he'd stolen from his own family to fund his secret life. Ms. Chen wasn't finished. She displayed copies of the jewelry receipt I'd found, the Valentine's card addressed to My Darling V, records of hotel stays and restaurant bills charged to business accounts for personal use. Every piece of evidence was dated, sourced, undeniable. What you're seeing, Ms. Chen explained calmly, is a pattern of marital asset dissipation, the illegal transfer of jointly owned property without spousal consent. Under state law, Mrs. Anderson had legal ownership of 50% of everything in those accounts. Mr. Anderson had no right to transfer those funds without her knowledge. Vivian's triumphant expression had completely disintegrated. She stared at the screen, at the undeniable evidence of manipulation, at proof that what she'd believed was a love story was actually a crime. "He told me you two were separated," she said, her voice breaking, losing its theatrical quality and becoming genuinely desperate. "He showed me papers. He said you had an arrangement, that you were practically divorced, that the marriage was just legal paperwork." "What papers?" Ms. Chen demanded sharply. With shaking hands, Vivian fumbled in her designer bag and pulled out documents. Ms. Chen took them, examined them briefly, and actually laughed, a short, humorless sound. "These are draft divorce papers that were never filed, never signed by Mrs. Anderson, never submitted to any court. They have no legal validity whatsoever. Mrs. Shaw, I'm afraid you've been deceived as thoroughly as Mrs. Anderson was." The room spun with tension. Every eye was on Vivian now, no longer sympathetic, no longer curious, but judging. She looked around at all those faces and saw the truth reflected back at her. She wasn't a grieving partner with legitimate claims. She was the other woman who'd participated in betraying a family, even if unwittingly. "He promised me," Vivian whispered, tears streaming down her face now, all pretense of control gone. "He promised Marcus would be taken care of. He promised we'd be secure. He said after the divorce was final, we'd get married. He showed me a ring." "Promises without legal documentation mean nothing in probate law," Ms. Chen said, not unkindly but firmly. And Mr. Anderson never legally acknowledged Marcus as his son. There are no paternity tests on record, no formal acknowledgement, no legal documentation establishing parental rights. Without that, Marcus has no legal claim to the estate regardless of biological relationship. Vivian swayed on her feet. The reality crashed over her visibly. All those years, all those promises, all that time invested in a relationship built on lies. Everything Richard had told her was false. There would be no inheritance, no security, no validation, just public humiliation and the realization that she'd been used. Her legs buckled. She collapsed right there in the conference room, fainting from the shock and humiliation, her expensive bag spilling its contents across the floor. Marcus rushed to her side, crying, "Mom! Mom!" His young voice was panicked, scared, completely lost. Several people moved to help. Someone called for water. But I sat perfectly still, watching the woman who'd tried to take everything from my family lying unconscious on the floor, and I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just emptiness where my marriage used to be. The aftermath of that disastrous will reading unfolded with swift, methodical efficiency over the following weeks and months. Vivian recovered from her faint within a few minutes. Someone had brought water, she'd been helped to a chair, and the paramedics who were called determined she was physically fine, just overwhelmed by shock and stress. Marcus, that poor, confused teenage boy who was just as much a victim of Richard's lies as anyone, helped his mother to their car. I watched them leave, and despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for the boy. None of this was his fault. His father had lied to him, used him, promised him a legacy that was never legally his to give. Ms. Chen worked tirelessly over the next 2 months to unwind Richard's financial manipulations. Every trust he'd created without my knowledge was dissolved by court order. Every penny he'd systematically transferred from our joint marital accounts was traced, recovered, and returned to the estate. The downtown condominium where Richard had been living his secret life was sold, and the proceeds returned to where they legally belonged, with me and our children. The life insurance policies where he'd illegally changed beneficiaries without my consent were corrected, the death benefits paid according to the original designations. It was meticulous, exhausting work that required filing motions, attending court hearings, providing endless documentation. But Ms. Chen was relentless, and the law was clear. Vivian had no legal standing. The trusts were invalid. The transfers were illegal. One by one, every attempt Richard had made to divert our family's assets was reversed. Vivian did attempt to fight back initially. She hired a lawyer and filed suit for palimony, claiming she'd been in a committed relationship with Richard for 3 years and deserved financial support from the estate. She also filed for child support on Marcus's behalf, arguing that regardless of legal documentation, Richard was biologically his father and had financial obligations. But without a legal marriage or common law relationship recognized by the state, the palimony claim went nowhere. And without Richard's formal acknowledgement of Marcus, no paternity test results on file, no legal documents, no acknowledgement in any official capacity, the child support claim was dismissed as well. The courts were absolutely clear. Regardless of the relationship's existence, regardless of whether promises were made, Vivian had no claim to marital assets. Richard had been married to me until the moment he died. Everything accumulated during our marriage was marital property, and his attempts to give it away without my consent were illegal. 3 months after the will reading, after the legal battles had settled and the money had been recovered, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Vivian, handwritten on simple stationery, nothing designer or expensive. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure what to expect. Threats, accusations, more demands. Instead, it was an apology, a genuine, heartbroken apology that made her almost human to me for the first time. "Dear Helen," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just want you to know that I was fooled too. Richard showed me fake divorce papers with what looked like your signature. He told me elaborate stories about you being cruel and emotionally distant, about the marriage being dead for years, about you staying together only because of financial entanglements. He painted himself as a victim trapped in a loveless situation, and I believed every word. I never thought to verify his claims. I never demanded to see actual divorce filings. I trusted him completely, and that was my mistake. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I participated in hurting you, even if I didn't fully understand what I was doing. I just wanted you to know that Richard was a talented liar who fooled us both. I hope you find peace. Vivian." I read that letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. She was right. Richard had been a skilled, practiced liar who'd manipulated both of us in different ways. He'd made me feel secure while stealing from me. He'd made her feel chosen while using her. We were both victims of his selfishness, his cowardice, his inability to be honest with anyone. I never responded to her letter, but I didn't hate her anymore either. The burning anger that had sustained me through the legal battles had cooled, leaving behind something closer to exhausted acceptance. Hating Vivian wouldn't bring Richard back or undo his betrayal. It wouldn't restore the years I'd lost or repair the trust that was shattered. It would just keep me chained to pain. I sold our house 6 months after Richard died. Too many memories lived in those walls, both real and false, beautiful and poisoned. I couldn't separate the genuine moments from the lies anymore, couldn't walk through rooms without wondering which version of Richard had been present. The kitchen where we'd shared morning coffee, had he been thinking about her while sitting across from me? The bedroom where we'd made love, had he been comparing us? I needed a fresh start, a space that didn't echo with questions I'd never have answers to. I bought a smaller, charming house 3 blocks from Sarah's family. It had a sunny kitchen, a manageable garden, and a porch perfect for reading. I decorated it with only the pieces that brought me joy. Family photos of my children and grandchildren, books I loved, plants that flourished under my care. Nothing of Richard's made it into that new house except our wedding photo, which I kept in a drawer. Not displayed, but not destroyed. A reminder of what I'd believed was real, even if it wasn't. I spent more time with my grandchildren, attending their soccer games and school plays, baking cookies with them on Saturday afternoons. I rediscovered hobbies I'd abandoned over the years. I joined a book club, took a watercolor painting class, volunteered more hours at the library. I traveled with Margaret and some friends to places I'd always wanted to see. I even started a support group at my local community center for women dealing with infidelity and financial abuse. Helping others process their pain somehow helped me process mine. Slowly, painfully, over many months and then years, I rebuilt Helen. Not Richard's wife, not the victim of his deception, not the foolish woman who'd been blind to betrayal. Just Helen, a woman with her own identity, her own interests, her own worth that had nothing to do with being someone's partner. I learned to sleep alone without feeling lonely. I learned to make decisions without consulting anyone. I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for, that I'd survived something that could have destroyed me, and that survival itself was a form of victory. Looking back now, 2.5 years after that devastating phone call from the hospital, after the funeral confrontation, after the legal battles and tears and sleepless nights, I understand something profound that I wish I'd known earlier. Richard's betrayal wasn't about my worth or what I lacked as a person, as a wife, as a woman. It had absolutely nothing to do with me not being enough. It was entirely about his character, his choices, his fundamental weaknesses as a human being. For too long, months actually, I let his actions define me. I let them make me feel invisible, inadequate, foolish, worthless. But I was never any of those things. I was never invisible. I was always here, always present, always contributing. I raised 3 remarkable children who are kind, honest, and strong. I built a warm home filled with love. I supported a business that flourished partly because I handled everything else, so Richard could focus on work. I touched countless lives through my work at the library, through my friendships, through simple acts of kindness to neighbors and strangers. I was always visible. Richard just chose not to see me clearly, chose to take me for granted, chose to believe his comfort and happiness entitled him to everything while owing me nothing but lies. I was always valuable, always enough, always worthy of honesty and respect and fidelity. The problem was never me. It was always him. The truth I've come to accept, painful as it is that betrayal reveals far more about the betrayer than it ever does about the betrayed. Richard's choices showed his character, his selfishness, his cowardice, his willingness to hurt people who loved him rather than face difficult truths and make hard decisions. He chose deception over honesty, chose easy comfort over integrity, chose to live a lie rather than face the consequences of his desires. Those were his failures, his moral bankruptcy, his shortcomings, not mine. My only real mistake, if I can even call it that, was trusting too completely and loving too blindly. But honestly, I'd rather be someone who loves deeply, who trusts genuinely, who believes in the goodness of people, than someone who lies easily, who manipulates skillfully, who uses other people's love as a weapon against them. My capacity for trust might have made me vulnerable, but it doesn't make me foolish. It makes me human. The moral of my story isn't that you should suspect everyone, or build impenetrable walls around your heart, or approach every relationship with cynicism and doubt. That's not the lesson here. The lesson is that you should value yourself enough to demand honesty, to investigate when your gut tells you something is wrong, and to fight for what's rightfully yours when circumstances demand it. Being kind doesn't mean being weak. Being trusting doesn't mean being naive. Being gentle doesn't mean being a doormat. And being betrayed definitely doesn't mean being broken beyond repair. I rebuilt myself, stronger and wiser than before. I protected my children's inheritance and secured my own future. I stood up for my dignity when the world tried to discard me like I didn't matter. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's self-respect. That's recognizing your own value and refusing to let anyone diminish it, even someone you loved for nearly 50 years. Sometimes the people we love most deeply are the ones capable of hurting us most profoundly. That's the terrible price of vulnerability, of opening your heart completely. But here's what I've learned. We're also capable of surviving that hurt and emerging not just intact, but transformed, stronger, clearer about who we are and what we deserve, more protective of ourselves without becoming bitter or closed off. I'm 74 years old now. I have a beautiful life surrounded by people who genuinely love me. I have peace in my little house with its sunny garden. I have purpose through my volunteer work and support group. I have joy in my grandchildren's laughter and my friends' company. I have myself fully, completely, without apology. So now I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought back publicly like I did, exposing everything in that conference room? Or would you have handled it privately, quietly, keeping the betrayal hidden to protect your dignity? Have you ever discovered a betrayal that changed everything you believed about your life? How did you survive it? What helped you rebuild? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your perspectives, your stories, your wisdom. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our pain is the first step toward healing. And if this story moved you, if it resonated with something you've experienced or witnessed, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support genuinely helps us continue sharing these powerful stories about resilience, justice, betrayal, survival, and the incredible strength we all have inside us, even when we don't realize it's there until we're forced to find it. Thank you for listening to my story, for giving me your time and attention, for allowing me to share the most painful chapter of my life in hopes that it might help someone else facing similar darkness. Remember this: you are stronger than you think. You are more valuable than anyone's treatment of you suggests. You are worthy of honesty, respect, and genuine love. And if you're going through betrayal right now, please know you will survive this. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but you will come through it. And on the other side, you'll discover a version of yourself you never knew existed. A version that's been there all along, just waiting for the moment you'd need her strength. You've got this. I promise you do.